Good morning. Figured we get started on time today since we're missing a few people. We might be able to get through a few verses today. Glad everybody's here. Any prayer requests? I've got a few to add. If you haven't seen the emails, Jacob Pace's surgery went well. Correct me if I'm missing anything. He is home. They're still waiting results of what this mass was on his brain, but the surgery went well. They got everything. They're just trying to wait for the results, and he is home recuperating, and he's doing okay for what he's gone through. Emily's cousin, Randa, there was an email out on her. She is not on hospice yet. The papers haven't been signed for that to happen, so she's still struggling with some pain and things like that. Emily and them went to see her a few days ago, but she's coherent sometimes and not, but eventually she will be put on hospice. Unfortunately waiting for a liver transplant, but it don't look like that's going to be coming about, so we want to remember her. And Cindy Drizel sent me an email about her friend Lila Fabro. She had a growth removed on her throat and it was cancerous. She's going to be having some PET scans soon, and as of right now the doctors think radiation will take care of it, and that's the plan they're going to be doing, but they don't know when that's going to be starting. So we need to remember these folks. Is there anybody else we need to add to our prayer list? I know we got quite a few people who are traveling, and quite a few who's going to be heading out today as well. Anything else? Let's begin with prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this time you've given us this morning. We thank you for this beautiful day that we have. Father, we have family and friends who are traveling and are going to be traveling today. We ask that you let them have a good time where they're at and keep them safe on the roads, Lord. Father, our family and friends who are struggling with illnesses, we're thankful that Jacob's surgery went well. But as we wait for the results of the biopsy of what this mass was, we pray, Father, that it is not cancerous, but if it is, we ask that the doctors have a plan in place to take care of it, and that Jacob can start healing and at one point become cancer-free. Father, we're mindful of Rhonda, Emily's cousin. We ask that you be with her as her liver has failed, and she's going to be in hospice soon. Father, at some point we ask that the doctor able to give her the medicine to give her comfort in these last times for her. And Father, be with Cindy Drizel's friend Lila as she had a cancerous growth removed. Even though there's a plan in place, Father, it hasn't started yet. We ask that the cancer is stopped, and these treatments she's going to be having will do the thing on the cancer, and she herself will be cancer-free. Be with those I haven't mentioned, Father, that are struggling with illnesses. We ask that you be the doctors that are guiding their care, that their health can be restored, and assemble again with us to worship you. In Jesus' name, amen. We're in Daniel chapter 11. And really, Daniel 10, 11, and 12 is a build-up of the first 9 chapters. We've seen things that happened in the first few chapters in the book of Daniel. And this is all to basic accumulation of what's going to be happening to God's people. And the angel here is telling Daniel of what's going to be happening. And it's really chapters 1 through 9 is a build-up to some battles that are going to be coming into place. The Persians and the Greeks, the Ptolemies and Seleucids, and really the climax of what's going to be happening at the end of chapter 11 here, Antiochus IV Epiphanes and the Jews. And Antiochus is going to bring a lot of grief to the Jews that we're going to be reading about in next week or two in the end of chapter 11. And this is what the angel is telling Daniel. Not in a lot of detail. Our history tells us what this detail is. But this is the buildup that we're seeing of these battles that are going to be taking place. And as Daniel chapter 11 started off, we saw that these 3 kings are going to be starting to come into power. Then there's going to be a 4th one that's going to be even more powerful. And the 4th one was King Xerxes. And then it starts talking about this other king in I believe it was verse 4. And that's getting out of the Ptolemies and Seleucids and starting to talk about Alexander the Great. And we know he was the one of Greece. And all this, if we remember some of the visions that we saw about the statue with the 4 different kingdoms, then the 4 beasts, and then we see the one with Daniel with the ram and the goats. These are all pointing to these battles here of what's going to be going on. And we also know that with the kingdom of Greece, it was one main king, which was Alexander the Great. Then it was divided up into for other smaller kingdoms, so to speak, and that was because of his 4 generals. And we really don't talk about 2 of those. We basically talk about the 2 remaining, which was Seleucus the first and Ptolemy the first, that took over, that became the Ptolemies and Seleucids, which is some of the battles that we've briefly touched on now, and we're going to get into a little bit more. There's going to be a lot of history here, like I said last week. And I actually reached out to my history teacher from high school. Been texting him back and forth on Facebook. And, you know, here's what I'm teaching. I've got a lot of history. What do I do? He goes, well, how'd you remember what I taught? I'm thinking, I didn't listen. I don't know what you taught. That was 30 plus years ago. He says, I used a lot of visual things, but I also kind of tied it personal. And I remember, anytime he told us a story, whether it was world history or American history, I had this Uncle Luke that did this. I had this Uncle Matt that did this. I said, Mr. Medley, I can't do that. He says, show them pictures. If you got graphs, get the information in front of their eyes versus saying it, because you're going to give them a lot of names, a lot of places, and they're not going to remember it. It just makes sense. So I've got a couple of pictures and graphs for you of what's happening between the Ptolemies and Seleucids. And this also takes place involving the Jewish people because, oh man, you can't read that very well. Sorry. On my monitor, when it's sitting right here, I can see it clear as day. In the yellow in the lower left is the Ptolemy territory, which is Egypt and whatnot. And then that little yellow that's ticking up to the right there, that's where Gaza and that is, in Jerusalem. And then all the blue, you see the Seleucid Empire. The yellow, the Ptolemies, and the Seleucids are going to be battling each other, and look who's in the middle. This is a closer picture of it. In the lower left of the screen is the Egypt area where the Ptolemies are. Then you can see the purple and white stripe. That's where the Jewish people are mainly at right now. And the Seleucids is up toward the right hand of the screen. They're battling, so the Jewish people are caught in these constant battles between the Ptolemies and Seleucids. One's coming from the north heading down, the other's from the south heading up, and the Jewish people are caught in the middle. So they're naturally involved of what's going on because of the wars going back and forth. But for the most part, the Jewish people run under the Ptolemy rule. But eventually they'll become under the Seleucid rule. But this is where God's people are caught in action, where we're talking about here in Daniel chapter 11. So that's the location. And you've heard me talk about Seleucus the first, Ptolemy the first. This is somewhat readable. On the left side of the screen are basically the Ptolemies. You can see the kings and how they come through and their years of their reign. And on the right side where the Seleucid Empire started in its reign and how it jogs along. And then the arrows where you see them point to somebody, that means that person, like Berenice with the M, she married Antiochus. Laodice was already married to Antiochus. But we're going to get that later on. But so you can see how these empires were separate. They kind of got a little intermingled. And then you can see how it later on went down. And eventually, chapter 11 is going to wind up with Antiochus IV Epiphanes in the middle of the screen down toward the bottom. He's the guy that we're really going to be talking about, which Daniel 10 and 11 is building up to, where he's the one that's going to be causing the grief the most, the Jews the most problems. And getting to that point is what we're going to be going through in Daniel chapter 11 here. So when I start spouting off names to you, these are the kings that are doing what it is. So eventually I'm going to start saying Ptolemy the first, second. I'm going to forget their last name, or the second part of the name. It's going to be the first, second, and third and all that. But these are the kings that are going to be in power, that are going to be battling against each other, from the Ptolemies, from the Seleucids on the right-hand side. Even though it's Antiochus, he's in the Seleucid Empire. But these kings are going to be battling each other at some point, and some of them weren't in power very long, some weren't in power at all because of being killed at certain reasons for whatever, but we will get through all that. And that's what chapter 11 is talking about here, that we're going to be strolling through. So there's a lot of information on this stuff, and you're going to hear me saying a lot of these names, but this is the order that it's coming through. Sure, you can have that, or I can give you a hard copy at some point. Go ahead, take it. I don't care. It's not proprietary. Well, it should be. I mean, yes.
I've never seen this before.
I created it in Excel this morning about 1 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. This to me is very, very informative. And Antiochus IV guy in the middle there, he's the terrible, terrible guy.
Yes.
And his sister was Cleopatra? Am I correct?
That's the information that I found.
And that's the Cleopatra that we all know from history, Cleopatra.
I'm not sure if that's the name. This is supposedly Cleopatra the First. I don't know if the Cleopatra we know is the first, second, third, or fourth.
There were more than one Cleopatra.
Yes.
Okay.
I think Cleopatra that we're very familiar with was Cleopatra the Fourth, but in everything that I found in all these commentaries, I could not nail that down.
But then that would mean that like Cleopatra 2, 3, and 4 would have been descendants of Cleopatra 1?
Yes. Somehow related, whether it's through her or through another relative.
I had no idea of this kind of relationship.
I mean, when I get further into the commentary, refreshing my notes, it might tell me more about where that is, but I did not stop looking, and I stopped looking to see the Cleopatra that we all know about. But I do not believe this is the one.
Did you say we could get a copy of this?
Yes, you can. I figured Tess was one, so I actually brought her one this morning. So I didn't think anybody else would have it. Okay, I got three requests. They're $5.99 now, folks. I'm sorry. No, I'll bring a handful in, not a problem. But I found this, and it made it so much easier for me to understand when I'm reading through. Okay, Ptolemy the First did this, second did this. Oh, now he's fighting Antiochus, and this guy, and it started keep changing the kings as I'm going through chapter 11. It's like, wait a minute, let me start putting these folks in order, and tried to put the bloodlines together. And when I start, this daughter married this guy on the other side. Well, this guy was already married to somebody else, and like, okay, how does this happen? And it keeps going back and forth. But like I said, the ones with the arrows, they're married to the guy that they married the guy that they're pointing to. But the left side of the screen is the Ptolemy Empire and the kings that reigned in it. Some of them reigned for a long time, some of them reigned for a short time. And the Seleucid Empire is on the right side. And you can see how it splits up under Laodicea on the right side. There's a whole story we're going to get into on that, and then how it split through there. And you would think, well, there's the Seleucus II versus Antiochus II. Well, if it's the Seleucid Empire, why isn't Seleucus II the guy that's going to cause the Jews a problem where it's further down in the middle there, Antiochus IV? There's a story to that in history, and you're lucky. We're going to get into it. So, but this is what chapter 11 is talking about. Daniel didn't get this. Daniel didn't get these names. Daniel's just told, in the future, the king of the north. In the future, the king of the south. So he doesn't know who these kings are. He does know there's the Greek Empire. He does know there's the Persian Empire. He does know there's the Mede Empire. He does know there's the Seleucids. But he doesn't know who these kings are. And he doesn't necessarily know it's the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, because he's told there's this one great kingdom, Greece, divided into 4. Well, 2 of the 4 are the Ptolemies and Seleucids. Daniel doesn't know what's coming as far as detail. The Greek Empire is not a power yet. Roman Empire is not a power yet. They're coming into power. But this is hundreds of years down the road from when Daniel's being told to the dates that these are happening. Because we see Ptolemy the first on the top left is 323. Daniel was taken into captivity at roughly 605 and lived roughly 85 years. That's nowhere near 323 when what the angel is telling Daniel here in chapter 10 and chapter 11. Here's what's happening. He's talking something hundreds of years down the road. And then when we get down toward the end of chapter 11, we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes in the middle toward the bottom from 175 to 164. Again, Daniel was in 605 when he first taken in captivity. Now we're talking what's going to be happening to Jews in 175. And we're looking at 400 years of what's going to be happening. And there is no record of this in the Bible. This, what we talk about sometimes, happens between the Testament during the Maccabee time, which there is no biblical recording. It's all historical recordings, whether it's through the Romans, the Greeks, or whoever. So it's historical records that this comes about, which supports the prophecy that we see here in Daniel of what's to come. So history is supporting the prophecy that we've read about and we're reading about in Daniel, and not just here in chapter 10 and 11. The vision in chapter 2, the vision in chapter 7, what happened in chapter 8, all of these things started pointing to this, and it's supported through historical records of this really happened. And it's recorded that it was going to happen 400 plus years before it did happen. So, yes, Bob? It's a continuation of chapter 10, yes. This is where Daniel had, remember in chapter 10, Daniel had fasted for a long time, and he saw this, what looked like a man at the river's edge. This is that angel that was talking to Daniel in chapter 10, and it was a continuation from chapter 10 to a chapter 11. The same time frame at the same instant, this angel is saying, here's what's going to happen in the future. I'm going to let you know what's going to happen in the future. So, any other comments? A lot of information here. I'm not going to be throwing this back up very much, but you're going to be hearing these names pop up a lot in what we're going to be going through in chapter 11 here. And like I said, it's all going to spearhead down at the point of Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, down the middle there, where he's going to be the one that this is coming to, and he's the guy that's going to be causing the Jews most of their grief during this roughly 400 or 500 time period. And that's what Daniel's talking about. It was the first screen I showed where the, go back to 3, the Greeks and the Persians. There wasn't much talk about those battles, but we did briefly talk about it, and I think it was, it might have been at the start of chapter 11 or in chapter 10. Not much was mentioned, but that's when it was first started. We're going to be talking a lot about the Ptolemies and Seleucids here. So the battles and the issues are building up between these nations and with the Jews caught in the middle. And it's all going to come to head with Antiochus IV and the Jews ending chapter 11. That's what this angel's saying. Here's what's going to be happening to God's people. Here's the understanding I'm going to be giving you. And this is what it's all going to be accumulation of, getting down to the end there. Any questions? I will make sure to bring in plenty of those copies, so if anybody wants one, I'll have them up front or throw them on the table. But if you want one, I'll make sure there's plenty here. I do, but it's kind of faded on one side. It might work, but let's see it. Anything else before we move on? I know I kind of went back a lot, but I think this is important so we can see where it's happening at. We can see that the Jews are caught in the middle again. But remember, this is their own doing. They're in captivity way back with Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 1 of Daniel because of their own doing, because they weren't faithful to God. They weren't following and doing what he was saying. So how does God punish you? He put them in captivity. They were in captivity from Nebuchadnezzar all this time here. And it was their own doing. They did something they shouldn't, and God is punishing his people. And they're having to deal with what's going to be happening, and these consequences are getting worse and worse and worse for them. And it, like I said, comes ahead with Antiochus IV, and when he really brings the grief to the Jewish people. If nothing else, we're going to go on to verse 5, Daniel 9. Daniel 11. I don't want to go backwards. Verses 5 through 9. We've been in Daniel 11 long enough, a couple weeks here, so no. Daniel 11, verses 5 through 9. And remember, we know the names. Daniel doesn't, and the angel's not saying it. So we're going to be reading, like it starts off in verse 5, and the king of the south, and he's going to be referring also to the king of the north. The south is the Seleucids. I'm sorry, the north is Seleucid Empire. The south is the Ptolemies. The south, roughly Egypt. The north, roughly Syria. I mean, I have a hard time remembering it, so as you can very well tell there. But we're not going to be hearing names through the scriptures. We're going to be hearing king of the north, king of the south. Verse 5 through 9. Then the king of the south will grow strong along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His domain will be great, a great dominion indeed. After some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. She will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, as well as he who supported her in those times. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their enemy and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, he will take in captivity to Egypt, and he on his part will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but he will return to his own land. Reading this multiple times, it was hard to understand until I started putting names with it. And then you can see the king of the north of what is going to be happening here. So verse 5 is saying the king of the south, which is reference to the Ptolemies, which is Ptolemy the first there. And this was one of Alexander's generals, where the kingdom was split into four places. This is the one who took over the Egypt and Palestine area. And eventually, the Ptolemies was eventually, as the battles went on, was really just restricted down to Egypt and Cyprus for the most part. But we could see on that one map how large it was. But eventually, through battles and wars, as the time went on, their kingdom was eventually reduced quite a bit in size. So we now know, verse 5 here says, the king of the south is Ptolemy the first, and then one of the princes who will gain ascendancy over him. The prince that it's talking about here is Seleucus the first. That is the prince that it's talking about. This is another one of Alexander's general. So we can see here that there was no battle between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. They were kind of getting along. But Seleucus the first, he obtained, his control was mainly over Babylon in roughly 320 BC. He was attacked by Antagonus in 316. After all that, Seleucus the first, he fled to Ptolemy the first area in Egypt, and he served under him. He became a prince under him at that point. Remember, none of this is in the Bible. This is all through historical records that all this information is coming from. So Ptolemy the first is king down in the Egypt area. Seleucus the first retreated underneath him, and he's kind of serving him at that point. And both of those went up and defeated Antagonus. This is the guy who attacked Seleucus the first that caused him to retreat back down. And after that battle, Seleucus returned to Babylon, and he became king there. So now he's establishing himself, this prince that's referred to here in verse 5. Seleucus the first is now establishing himself in the Babylon area, and after that he started taking over a lot of area that the guy that attacked him, that Antagonus, started overtaking his land. And Antagonus was killed in approximately 301. When Antagonus was killed, Seleucus I made Antioch of Syria the capital of his kingdom. So trying to get us our locations again. If you need me to throw up a map, let me know and I'll do that. Seleucus I's empire started growing. It started growing largely. He was capturing a lot of area, but in that area there were not a whole lot of people because he started expanding, and he eventually expanded way over to, I believe it was way over to India area, where the Seleucid Empire started expanding to. And in turn, that was giving him more area. He was starting to become more powerful. He was becoming a greater king than Ptolemy the first, the guy that he was prince under. And we see in verse 5, history is telling us, there's historical records of this happening. So the king of the south, Ptolemy the first, he was strong. One of his princes, Seleucus the first, gained ascendancy over him. Seleucus took over the Syria area, expanded to India area, and he became a greater and more powerful king and had more dominion than what Ptolemy the First did. And that's where the Ptolemy and Seleucids kind of separated themselves from each other, and then we're going to start getting into these two nations starting to battle each other. And remember, both Ptolemy the First and Seleucus the First, they were generals underneath Alexander the Great. So they knew each other. They came from some of the same teachings. They were both under Alexander the Great, but these two are two of the four kings that the Greek Empire was split up into. Any questions on that? So now we can see how the Ptolemies and the Seleucids are starting to separate entities, and we're going to get into how they're going to start battling each other at some point. They got along with each other for a while, as we see in verse 6. There was, they worked together, then all of a sudden there was going to be an alliance with them, and if there's an alliance, that means either there was some miscommunication, there was some disagreement between them. He says, let's put this aside, let's make a deal, let's not fight each other. But what they're doing here is, with this agreement, to have something peaceful. So in verse 6 we see, and the daughter of the king of the south, the daughter of the Ptolemies, which would be Bernice, we see it's down to Ptolemy the second already for her to be active. So that means at some point Ptolemy the first is no longer in power. He died at some point. And then as we go further down, Seleucus the first, he's going to die. Antiochus the first is taken over. Antiochus the second is going to be in play, because now we're all getting down to lower in the timeline of who's in charge here. So in verse 6 is talking about Ptolemy the second. He was made ruler under this peace treaty with Antiochus the second. And the daughter that was referred to in verse 6 is Berenice. So Ptolemy the second gave his daughter Berenice to marry Antiochus the second. Unfortunately for him, he accepted her, but he was already married. I see you're laughing. He was married to Laodice. She was a very influential woman and a very powerful woman. And for whatever reason, Antiochus decided that I can't have both of these wives. I got to get rid of one. He divorced Laodice. Not only divorced her, he banished her, which that put her in a very fantastic and great mood. So she's off to the side. Antiochus has got a new wife. He's got this peace treaty agreement with Ptolemy II. And at some point, Antiochus II had a change of heart. He took back his first wife. And we can all kind of figure out how that went off back in that day. At some point, Laodice was not extremely happy with the situation. She had a plan, and she made arrangements for the assassination of her husband, Antiochus II, by having him poisoned. So he's killed. What?
This is terrible. It keeps on getting
It gets worse. And this isn't even what's going to happen to the Jewish people. What's happened to them is going to get worse. And remember, these folks don't have elections back in the day for the king to take power. Usually it's father to son, father dies, son takes over. Father in battle, he gets killed, son takes over. Well, we see that from Seleucus first to Antiochus first. Father lives, he dies, son takes over. Now we're down to Antiochus second. Things should be good. He was married. He muddled the waters by taking a bride from somebody else, trying to make a peace agreement. His wife, who was powerful and influential, she said, I'm not having any of this. So she had him poisoned. He's killed. And she also, because she wasn't happy because her husband married somebody else, so what did she do? She had Bernice killed and her infant son killed. So that whole lineage is now gone. So Bernice and her son is killed. Antiochus the second, he is killed. So that leaves Laodice. She's alive, and she happened to have a son from Antiochus II, and his name is Seleucus II. So he's now going to be somewhat taking power. He's not old enough when all this happens. So Laodice, she takes over as queen regent, meaning she's in control until her son is old enough and he can take power. So she is running the country of the Seleucids at this point until her son is able to take over him, and he would reign from, I can't read what it is. I clipped it off. From 246 to 225 is when Seleucus II took over and reigned. So that's how we can see the Seleucid Empire kind of got corrupted a little bit because of Bernice, Antiochus II, and Laodice of what happened with them. And that's carrying out of exactly what's saying happened in verse 6. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in. That's talking about Bernice, of everything that was happening to her, as well as he who supported her in those times. So, by what history is telling us of the king was poisoned, the one wife was killed, her son was killed, that took care of that lineage, and anybody that was supporting them in that time is all over with. So the prophecy of what happened in verse 6, history tells us that came true of what happened to these folks. And unfortunately it was because of poisoning, murder, and killing of the woman and her son, which was murder as well. So she could take control until her son was able to rule the kingdom of the Seleucids. That's just one verse, one situation with one king. We've got several more to go through, and it doesn't get much better from there. Yes, Dave? The power is ruling the kingdom. She wouldn't retain being queen at that point. And so she's not able to rule it, and it goes down to and his power, and he will be given up with those who brought her in, and the one who sided her father, which is on the other side, as well as he who supported those in her house. So it is also referring to the lineage of everybody coming underneath her. It could very well be. I don't know what the Hebrew or Greek words for these are, because I know they have different meanings. I did not look that up to see if it did mean just strictly father, did mean child, or anything at that point. But we do know that her lineage was cut off. Yes, Tess? It means married. That's a footnote for me. Sorry, I can't remember things. Yeah, but the ones with the arrows, is the parentheses, the M stands for married, and the ones with the arrows is all three of those are women in that point. And the arrow is pointing to who they married. So Bernice, it was married to Antiochus II, and her father, if you follow the line up, was Ptolemy II. And whoever Laodice, who father was, I didn't find that at all. And I really didn't think it was relevant to the lineage of the Seleucids at this point. Are you two all set with that? Okay. Anybody else? I know, a lot of information. You don't know how many times I stumbled across this and had to go back and forth and just to get a grasp of be able to kind of talk like I know what I'm talking about. But it's a lot of information here, and there's not a lot in the Bible. Like as we read the verses, there's no detail. There's specifics, but no detail. And we're getting the detail, and I think it's important for us to know the history of what's happened on so we can understand it here. Verse 7, it talks about one of her descendants, Bernice, of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against her army. Bernice was killed, and the one of her descendants of her line was able to rise in place of Antiochus II, that we see how they were tied to, and come against the Seleucids, which you were talking about in verse 9, come against their army, meaning the Seleucids, and enter the fortress of the king of the north. We know it's the Seleucids because they were in the north side. Ptolemy II, the father of Bernice, died during this time frame. His son, Ptolemy III, took over, and he went off to avenge his sister's death. So, Ptolemy III, you can see he's related to Bernice, sisters, a brother and sister. So he's off to war now. He's the one that's being talked about, that one of the descendants of her line, her brother, is going to go up against Antiochus. And remember, I'm telling you, it all didn't happen as I'm telling you the whole story, and now we got to go back. It's like you're watching something on TV. There's 3 scenes going on. They show you one, then they show you another, then they show you a third. They're all happening at the same time. So all of these are happening together, and they're kind of get blended. So Ptolemy III went off to avenge his sister's death, and the fortress of the north is referring to Antioch, which was the capital city of the Seleucids at this point. Now, during all this, we know that Antiochus II has died because he was poisoned. So during this time frame that happened, Laodicea's son eventually took over, Seleucus II, and these big battles are going to be happening. Ptolemy III is going to fight against Seleucus II for about 5 years, roughly from 246 to 241. And this is the battle that we're talking about here at the end of verse 7. And at the end of verse 7 it says, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Ptolemy captured Antioch, which was one of the capital city of the Syrian Empire. He was also successful in killing Laodicea. This is really what he was going after, because he was going after to avenge who killed his sister. He knew who killed his sister, which was Laodicea, so he's going to go battle the Seleucids to avenge his sister's death, and during this battle, Ptolemy was able to get Laodicea killed. So his basic thing that he wanted to do, he got done, but in turn, he was able to capture various land grabs as he was conquering to go avenge his sister's death, which he did by killing Laodicea. And that's kind of what verse 7 is talking about there, of somebody in her lineage, Bernice, was able to go in up to the north and take over. This was Ptolemy III that did this. Verse 8, it says, also their gods with their metal images and their precious metals, silver and gold, he will take into captivity. This is talking about Ptolemy III. Since he captured and conquered these areas, he's going to, of course, what a king would do, take all the precious metals and all the precious things at this point. And some of the things that he got, well, that's one that should have been way further back. We talked about Bernice. Wow, I missed a lot of these slides. Sorry, folks. This is what Ptolemy III took out of Babylon as he was marching doing his conquest. The value I found in the weights for like a talent of gold is the lowest number I found. I found like a talent of gold could also be valued up to 172 pounds, 1 talent up to 172 pounds. And I found 1 talent of silver also increased up to 33 pounds. So I took the lowest number. Ptolemy took 4,000 talents of gold. A talent, if it was 66 pounds, at that point, in today's dollar, would be worth $1.4 million. So he, roughly in gold, got, what, $5.6 trillion of gold back then. Then he took 40,000 talents of silver, which is billion. Give or take 3 zeros. So 5 billion, I'm sorry. So we got 5.6 billion, thank you, Terry, of gold, 1.1 billion of silver. Then that's just a dollar amount that was worth. So you can imagine how much gold and silver that is. And remember, I'm taking the lowest values and the lowest weights. So if a talent was actually worth 90 pounds instead of 66, the dollar amount rises. Plus 25,000 idols and sacred vessels of silver and gold. 2,500. Man, I better get my eyes checked. 2,500. So those numbers of the idols, that gold and silver is not included in the gold and the silver up above. That's how much wealth, how much treasure that Ptolemy III took from Babylon. And he actually became very popular with the Egyptian people when he brought these things back. And he was actually called, that's where he got his not his last name, the second part of his name, Euergetes, which means benefactor. So that's kind of how he got his second name there, and what it's meaning is it means benefactor. So by him doing this, by him avenging his sister's death, by him looting at some point and bringing all this wealth back, he became a true hero to the Egyptian people. And at that point, because he had conquered Seleucus II, he made a peace treaty with them, which is kind of smart on Seleucus II part, where he would refrain from attacking the north. Didn't say for how long, but he would refrain from attacking them, but it was only for some years, because eventually we're going to see where they're going to be starting attacking each other again. So, we're down to Ptolemy III and Seleucus II, and they're making this agreement that they're not going to battle each other anymore, at least for a little while. And we're going to see that that doesn't happen. The Ptolemies and Seleucids continually fight each other throughout this period of time. But we can see with what's happening here that in verse 8 that the vessels of silver and gold he'll take into captivity to Egypt. History says this is what he took, and he took it back to Egypt. So everything that the angel is telling Daniel here so far that we've read in chapter 11, all these prophecies, history has proved each and every one of them to be true. It's not the Bible saying it. Historical records where it's written down and says, this happened during this time. It doesn't say that the angel came to Daniel and said, this is what's going to happen. We see that in the Bible, but history says all this gold and silver was taken during a battle and taken back to Egypt. And the Bible here is telling us all these prophecies 400 plus years earlier of what's going to happen. Verse 9, then the later will enter the realm of the king of the south. The later meaning the king of the north, which is Seleucus II. He will enter the realm of the south, which means he's going to start going down to the Ptolemy area, but will return to his own land. So he basically comes down, and it sounds like he's going to go back up. But what this is saying, he's actually coming down to see if he can reclaim some of the land that he lost to the Ptolemies. He's going to try to get back some of the land he lost to in that battle with Ptolemy III. He was a little bit successful, not completely, but that's what verse 9 saying. He's going to come down, even though they had a treaty. He come down, kind of got back a little bit of land, and then retreated back to the north, where he was safe as could be for just a few more years until another battle ensues between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. I think we'll stop there for today. Any questions? A lot of history. Uh-oh. Tom. Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, with all that the Jews that went through, we'll go back to Nebuchadnezzar being taken in captivity in 605. Then the wars that went on between the Greeks and the Medes and the Persians against Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. So there's big battles there, and God's people are caught in the middle. And they're going from one rulership to another, and they're being treated well, they're being treated terribly. Then we're talking about the Ptolemies and Seleucids. They're being treated well, they're being treated terrible again. Then we're going to get into Antiochus IV. They're being treated very, very terribly. How can God's plan still come through? And we're seeing everything that's happening to God. We'll be seeing what's going to be happening to God's people during these times, how terrible it got for them. But yet, God still had his hand in. The angel, remember, that was talking to Daniel, said, I couldn't come to you because I had to help the king of Persia was resisting me. That spiritual battle that we're talking about. Gabriel came to assist him. But I'm going to tell you this, then I'm going to leave, because the king of Greece is coming. He's going to be fighting that spiritual battle to help thwart off Satan and his minions that are trying to influence these rulers that are overseeing God's people, that are being cruel and terrible to God's people. But yet, God's plan through all of this, and it even gets worse when we get into Antiochus, God's plan still came through, and Christ was born. And seeing all these things, me going into little detail to show everything that God's people went through in this 400-time-year period and how bad it got for them, yet God was still in control, and his plan still came through. I mean, it's kind of like the past. That's why I'm going into detail on it. I could read just these verses, and we could get the gist of it. But here's what I don't want to say what really happened. Here's what we know happened by detail. And it's just not, we don't have to take it for what God was inspired by these writers. History says it. And it's the detail here that says God's people went through all these things, yet his plan still came into fruition. Thanks for your comment. Anybody else? Thanks for being here today. Appreciate it. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you, and I will have that sheet if anybody wants it for next week.